everyone and welcome to today's lecture, which is about effect of stress on mental health. The objectives of today's topic are: be able to define stress, be able to understand the factors which mediate stress like social support, psychosocial resources and coping styles, be able to understand the concept of allostatic load and basic components of immune system, be able to understand the theories of the stress-illness link, and be able to understand the role of stress in mental disorders. Let us start with what is stress. Stress is the body's way of responding to any kind of demand or threat. When an individual senses danger, whether it's real or imagined, the body's defenses kick into high gear in a rapid automatic process known as the fight or flight reaction or the stress response. There are many ways in which the stress is defined. Some definitions focus on response to stress, while others focus on the stimuli that cause stress. One of the first scientists to use the term stress in describing the behavior of living organism was Hans Selye in 1950. He borrowed the term from the field of physics, where it referred to a driving force acting against a resistance. He offered a response-based definition of stress. Based on controlled laboratory studies with animals, Selye defined stress as a stereotypic response syndrome that was non-specifically induced. All stressors or noxious stimuli caused a universal triad of physiological consequences. Regardless of the stressor, the reaction to it was always the same and followed the same three stages of the general adaptation syndrome. In Selye's model, there are three phases of the response. During the first phase, the alarm reaction, the autonomic nervous system is activated by the stress. During the second phase, that is resistance, the organism tries to adapt to the stress through available coping mechanism. If the stressor persists or the organism is unable to adapt effectively, the third phase, exhaustion, follows and the organism dies or suffers irreversible damage. In Selye's syndrome, the emphasis was on the body's response, not the environmental events that trigger that response. Psychological researchers later broadened Selye's concept to account for the diverse stress responses that people exhibited, including emotional upset, deterioration of performance, or physiological changes such as increase in the levels of certain hormones. The problem with these response-focused definitions of the stress is that the criteria are not clear-cut. Physiological changes in the body can occur in response to a number of things that are not considered stressful. For example, anticipating a pleasurable event. Other researchers define stress as a stimulus, often referred to as a stressor, rather than a response, and identify stress with a long list of environmental conditions such as electric shock, boredom, catastrophic life events, daily hassles, and sleep deprivation. Stimuli that are considered stressors can be major, the death of a loved one, minor, daily hassles such as being stuck in traffic, acute like failing an exam, or chronic like a persistently unpleasant work environment. Like response-based definitions of stress, stimulus-based definitions present problems. It is important to acknowledge that people vary widely how they respond to life's challenges. A given event does not elicit the same amount of stress in everyone. For example, a family that has lost its home in a flood but has enough money to rebuild and strong social support from a network of friends nearby will experience less stress from this event than will a family that has neither adequate money to rebuild nor a network of friends to provide social support. As a way of addressing the limitations associated with defining stress as either a response or a stimulus, researchers have emphasized that how we perceive or appraise the environment determines whether the stressor is present. Now coming to mediating factors in stress. It includes social support, psychosocial resources, and coping abilities. A central postulate of all stress process formulations is the existence of factors that mediate the experience of stressors and the expression of the symptoms of illness or dysfunction. These mediating factors either intervene between stress and illness or have interactive or buffering effects that moderate the impact of stressors on distress and disorder. These mediating factors are: number 1, social support. A factor that can significantly reduce the negative effects of stress is social support. There have been numerous reviews and books highlighting the importance of social support in reducing stress. For example, Cohen and Wills, 1985, Turner in 1983, Sarason and Sarason in 1985. Moreover, these reviews have demonstrated that the social support is a multi-dimensional construct, including considerations of the structure of social networks, the functions of support, and an awareness of the distinctions between perceived and actual support. For instance, they distinguish between structural and functional social support. Structural support refers to a person's basic network of social relationships, which includes factors such as marital status and number of friends. Functional social support refers more to the quality of a person's relationships. For example, whether a woman believes she can call on friends in the time of need. Now coming to psychosocial resources. Individual psychosocial resources constitute a second important domain of mediators in stress process formulations. Research has demonstrated that self-efficacy and self-esteem are especially important resources that have important effects on the ways in which stressors manifest themselves as distress or disorder. Under the rubric of self-efficacy, numerous studies have demonstrated that personal constructs such as locus of control, mastery, helplessness, and fatalism have significant effects on the individual's mental health. Similarly, there is a substantial body of research documenting the benefits of self-esteem with respect to positive mental health. Now, coping abilities. Third variation in coping abilities and differences are important for stress process models. Relevant to individual differences in perception of potentially stressful situation is the concept of coping, or how people try to deal with problems, including the problem of handling the typically negative emotions that stress produces. Even among those who perceive the situation as stressful, the effects of stress may vary depending on how the person copes with it. Researchers have identified two broad dimensions of coping: problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. Now, what is problem-focused coping? It involves taking direct action to solve the problem or seeking information that will be relevant to the solution. An example would be developing a study schedule covering entire semester in order to reduce end-of-semester pressure. Now, emotion-focused coping. It involves efforts to reduce the negative emotional reactions to stress, for example, by distracting oneself from the problem, relaxing or seeking comfort from others. Let us now discuss about the stress-illness link. Theories of the stress-illness link are developed to understand how psychological factors such as negative emotions impact the health and disease. Theories in this domain are invariably diathesis stress in nature, that is, theories that focus on individuals' vulnerabilities to stress. It is clear that not all people respond to stress in the same way, and some people are more vulnerable. Some people are vulnerable to certain disorders and not to others. Researchers are focused on understanding psychological and neurobiological diatheses or vulnerabilities to stress. However, before understanding these vulnerabilities, it is important to consider some indirect influence of stress on health. For example, stress may lead to health changes in health-related behaviors. High stress may result in increased smoking, disrupted sleep, increased alcohol consumption, and altered diet. These behavioral changes may then increase the risk of illness. In addition, high stress may result in changes in cardiovascular reactivity to stress or in changes in the immune system, such as increase in cytokine production. These physiological changes may then increase the risk of illness. Thus, the stress-illness association is rare but is likely to be mediated through changes in health behaviors or in physiology rather than to be direct effect of stress. Now, neurobiological perspective. Biological responses are a healthy and regular part of responding to stress. It is only when biological responses to stress are continuously activated or when other neurobiological processes do not bring the body's systems back to their pre-stress levels within a reasonable amount of time that physiological damage can occur. The major biological responses to stress involve activation of the sympathetic nervous system and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axes. Now coming to allostatic load. Prolonged exposure to stress hormones. The body pays a price if it must constantly adapt to stress, and this price can be expressed in terms of what is referred to as allostatic load. For example, if a body is exposed to high levels of stress hormones such as cortisol and becomes susceptible to disease because of altered immune functioning, we can view this as an effect of a high allostatic load. The term allostasis has been coined to clarify ambiguities associated with the word stress. Allostasis refers to the adaptive processes that maintain homeostasis through the production of mediators such as adrenaline, cortisol, and other chemical messengers. These mediators of the stress response promote adaptation in aftermath of acute stress, but they also contribute to allostatic overload, the wear and the tear on the body and brain that result from being stressed out. This conceptual framework has created a need to know how to improve the efficiency of the adaptive response to stressors while minimizing overactivity of the same systems, since such overactivity results in many of the common diseases of modern life. This framework has also helped to demystify the biology of stress by emphasizing the protective as well as the damaging effects of the body's attempts to cope with the challenges known as stressors. People can manifest allostatic load in different ways. Some people may have high level of stress hormones simply because they experience frequent stress, whereas high level in other people may be because of some difficulty in adapting to stress. For example, some people have genetically slow to adapt biological stress reaction. Other people may have learned behaviors that interfere with adaptation, such as poor eating habits, too little experience, smoking, and excessive alcohol consumption. Still, others may have trouble shutting down the biological stress response. For example, they may exhibit an unusually high level of cortisol release in response to stress, which in turn causes other parts of the immune system to over-respond. Now coming to stress and the immune system. Stressors have multiple effects on the body, on the autonomic nervous system, on hormone levels, and on brain activity. One major area of current interest is the immune system, which is important consideration in infectious diseases, cancer, and allergies, as well as autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, in which the immune system attacks the body. The field that studies how psychological factors impact the immune system is called psychoneuroimmunology. Immune system involves a broad array of cells and proteins that respond when the body is infected or invaded. A useful way of thinking about the immune system is to consider two types of immunity, natural and specific. Now, what is natural immunity? It is the body's first and quickest line of defense against infectious microorganisms or other invaders. A number of different cells such as macrophages and natural killer cells are unleashed on the invaders and begin to destroy them. Inflammation or swelling is a sign of these natural immunity cells at work. Activation of macrophages in turn stimulate the release of substance called cytokines, which help initiate such bodily responses to infections as fatigue, fever, and activation of the HPA axis. The unpleasant fever is actually a sign that the body is responding as it should to an infection. Now, specific immunity. It involves cells that respond more slowly to infection, such as lymphocytes, which are involved in responding to specific pathogens or invading agents. Stress can cause deficiency of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as interleukin 6. Let us now discuss about effects of stress on mental health. Evidence for the adverse effect of stress on physical health, specifically its role in cardiovascular diseases like coronary heart disease and hypertension, is immense. Stress is therefore clearly implicated in causing or contributing physical illness. Moreover, stress also plays a role in most of the conditions that make up abnormal psychology. Stress disorders that require clinical attention are pathological because they go beyond expected normal emotional and cognitive reactions to severe personal challenges. The table being displayed lists some of the normal and abnormal responses to stress. As the table makes clear, many normal responses to stress become abnormal responses when the symptoms persist and are excessive. Clinicians may face problems in diagnosing abnormalities because of, number one, sometimes the indistinct separation between normal and abnormal reactions to stress. Number two, the overlaps in symptoms of stress-related disorders. As it is clear that there are important individual differences in how people appraise events, in their coping skills, and in their social support available to them. Stress plays a role in many types of maladaptive behavior. There are three conditions that, though different in their clinical presentations and dealt with by DSM-4-TR in different ways, are marked by stressors that serve as powerful triggers for behavior that requires clinical attention. In adjustment disorders, a recent increase in life stress precedes what is usually a temporary maladaptive reaction. In acute stress disorder, changes in behavior, thought, and emotion are linked to an extremely traumatic stressor. Dissociative disorders are among the most dramatic and puzzling form of abnormal behavior and are usually preceded by an upsurge of stress that the individual cannot handle. Adjustment disorders and acute disorder are considered to be more straightforward than dissociative disorders because of the ease of identifying the trigger and the relatively good prospects for recovery. Varying interpretations of dissociative disorders depend upon the weight given to a number of factors, including the stressors that immediately precede clinical flare-ups, stressors that may have occurred early in person's life, and biological causes. Now, adjustment disorders. A person with an adjustment disorder is someone who has not adapted to one or more stressors that have occurred in past 3 months. The stressor may involve a developmental transition such as marriage, divorce, childbirth, or menopause, or they might be situational such as changing school, getting a supervisor at work, or having been socially rejected, or there might be multiple stressors working together. Most of the time, persons' maladaptive reactions to these stressors tend to disappear when stressful situation dissipates or when a person adapts to it. Typical behaviors of individuals who have adjustment disorders are depression, anxiety, disturbances in conduct like truancy, fighting, reckless driving, disrupted sleep patterns, deterioration in performance at school, and social withdrawal. The information needed for making an adjustment disorder diagnosis is Time of onset and duration of the stressor. Symptoms must develop within 3 months after onset. Duration of symptoms, usually less than 6 months. Depressed mood and anxiety or inappropriate or antisocial conduct. The severity of the disorder is not directly proportional to the severity of the stressor because personality characteristics and cultural or group norms both contribute to how well an individual copes with a given set of circumstances. However, one characteristic of adjustment disorder is that the behavior displayed is in excess of what would normally be expected under circumstances. A return to pre-stressor functioning within 6 months can be expected, and the chances of complete recovery after the stress levels are back to normal are good. An adjustment disorder usually does not involve extremely bizarre behavior and is not part of a lifelong pattern of maladaptation. Studies have shown that individuals given this diagnosis are significantly less likely to have subsequent clinical problems than individuals given most other psychiatric diagnoses. One of the most important questions clinicians must answer in evaluating the possibility of an adjustment disorder is: what is the patient having trouble adjusting to? When there is no stressor, an adjustment disorder diagnosis is not made. Most adjustment disorders are transient, and in time people heal themselves. At the same time, it must be recognized that what is observed in adjustment disorders could also be a part of another and more long-lasting condition, such as a mood disorder. Now coming to acute stress disorder. While experiencing an extremely traumatic stressor, such as physical assault or witnessing an event that involves death or injury, or soon after it occurs, a person might show major changes in behavior, thought, and emotion. These changes stem from the intense fear, helplessness, or horror associated with the event. Acute stress disorder is marked by symptoms of dissociation that include a subjective sense of numbness, detachment, and absence of emotional responsiveness, feeling as if one were in daze, a feeling of unreality about oneself or about what is happening in one's life, and inability to recall important aspects of the trauma. These symptoms indicate a disruption in the usually integrated functions of consciousness, memory, identity, and perception of the environment and are referred to as dissociative symptoms. In dissociation, there is a breakdown or fragmentation in the coherence of mental life. One group of mental processes seems to become separated from the rest. While other symptoms might also be present in acute disorder, what is clinically clearest is the linkage between traumatic experience and dissociative symptoms. To make the diagnosis of acute stress disorder, DSM-4 TR requires that disturbance lasts for at least 2 days and at most 4 weeks after the traumatic event. Diagnostic criteria for acute stress disorder include exposure to an extreme event that evokes fear, helplessness, or horror. Dissociative symptoms like numbing, detachment, feelings of unreality, depersonalization, amnesia. Persistent re-experiencing of the event, marked avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event, marked anxiety and arousal. Clinically significant symptoms that last for a minimum of 2 days and a maximum of 4 weeks emerge within 4 weeks of the traumatic event and are not due to the effects of a substance such as medication or abused drug or a general medical condition. As with adjustment disorder, people diagnosed as having an acute disorder are expected to recover in relatively short period of time. The person suffering from acute stress disorder shows how high levels of anxiety and arousal, and they are often unable to keep from thinking with intense emotion about the traumatic event, and as a consequence, they persistently re-experience the trauma. Clinical interviews with persons who may have an acute stress disorder usually include the following types of questions, which are intended to determine whether the diagnostic criteria have been met. During or since a traumatic event, have you felt numb or distant from your own emotions? During or since traumatic event, have things around you seemed unreal? Have you had bad dreams or nightmares about the traumatic event? Have you avoided people or places or activities that may remind you of the traumatic event? Since the traumatic event, have you felt unusually irritable or have you lost your temper a lot more than usual? Acute stress disorder was included in the DSM classification system for the first time in 1994, and many questions remain to be answered concerning its most important features and its prevalence. The prevalence seems to vary with the stressor that led up to the disorder. For example, prevalence was found to be 6% for industrial accidents, 4 to 14% for automobile accidents, and 19% for violent assaults. Coming to the last portion of the topic, that is dissociative disorders. Some people, when they become overwhelmed by the traumatic experience, they experience what seems to be an altered state of consciousness, in which they become detached from the reality of what is happening. Dissociation involves feelings of unreality, estrangement, and depersonalization, and sometimes a loss or shift of self-identity. When the news of catastrophe first hits us, we may feel as if everything is suddenly strange, unnatural, and different. That is estrangement, or as if we are unreal or cannot be actually witnessing or feeling what is going on, that is depersonalization. There are 4 conditions of dissociative disorders: dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, dissociative identity disorder, depersonalization. Dissociative amnesia. It involves extensive but selective memory loss in absence of indications of organic changes, for example, head injury. The memory loss characteristic of amnesia is too extensive to be explained by ordinary forgetfulness. Now, dissociative fugue. Dissociative fugue. It has as its essential feature an unexpected travel away from home and the customary workplace, the adoption of a new identity and an inability to recall the previous identity. Dissociative identity disorder, often referred to as multiple personality disorder, is the most dramatic of the dissociative disorders. In this disorder, an individual assumes alternate personalities. Each personality has its own set of memories and typical behaviors, and usually none of the personalities has any awareness of others. In depersonalization, there is change in self-perception and the person's sense of reality is temporarily lost or changed. This brings us to the end of the topic. Thanks for watching.